Oh, newspapermen meet such interesting people. They know the lowdown, now it can be told. I'll tell you quite reliably off the record about some charming people I have known. For I meet politicians and grafters by the score, killers plain and fancy, it's really quite a bore. Oh, newspapermen meet such interesting people. They wallow in corruption, crime and gore. Ting-a-ling-ling, city desk, full the press, extra, extra, read all about it, it's a mess, meets the test. Oh, newspapermen meet such interesting people. It's wonderful to represent the press.
Media Project is a half hour of commentary and analysis. And some days we even have some insight into the meaty issues of the week, and we welcome you. I'm Rex Smith, here with some veteran journalists, Rosemary Armao, Barbara Lombardo, and, of course, Dr. Alan Chartock, to whom we turn first. Dr. Chartock, the CEO of Northeast Public Radio, political scientist, and here we have a convergence of politics and media in what's going on with Andrew Cuomo. Just to explain to our readers, we do pre-record this program, so as we speak, the governor of New York is Andrew Cuomo. Do we think this is going to last? But how about the media handling of the bombshell Andrew Cuomo report that came from the Attorney General, Tish James?
Well, first of all, I hate to be cruel about this, but I think the media is sort of like a pig rolling around in whatever that is, because this is a major story, of course, and there's a sort of death watch going on whether Cuomo, as we speak, will resign. I have had a long history with Andrew Cuomo, personal history. It's what got me into trouble with his father. He's done this kind of mean-spirited stuff all his life, and I've never really liked him. And in fact, the father and I ended up splitting up over Andrew because I had said that Andrew had no business running against Carl McCall, who was then running for governor. And for years, he didn't talk to me. And nor did he allow anybody in the governor's office to talk to us at WAMC. And then all of a sudden, something changed and he wanted to be on the air with me, and he was. And then he made a jerk out of himself a couple of times. One, he used in context the N-word, which got him into a lot of trouble. And then the second issue was, I asked him a simple question, what are you doing on Thanksgiving? He said his mother and his daughters were coming up to the mansion. And that at the very time when he had been saying to everybody, don't travel and don't go anywhere, stay home. And so he stopped talking to me. He's not talking to me anymore. What he did was his problem, but, you know, it's never going to be him. It's always somebody else.
Yeah. Maybe the association with talking to you was too painful because he got in trouble for saying those things, you know, and it was in the context.
Well, I'm sure that's right.
Yeah.
I'm absolutely sure that's right. But really, I got blamed for what he did, and that is typical Andrew.
Mm-hmm. Rosemary, you've probably seen this kind of thing before in politicians.
You know, I think the media should not be taking a rap for reveling in this story. What writer would not? Pride goeth before the fall. It's hubris. This is Shakespearean. This huge, powerful man on the top comes crashing down. The devastating detail and scope of that Attorney General's report shocked me. I mean, I was on the round table the morning it came out, just before it came out, saying, oh, this is going to be nothing. He's going to get out. And then I read that report. I didn't even read it all. I read part of it and said, oh, he is toast. And that is a major story that needs to be covered. If I fault the media for anything, it's for not carrying it further. This was done right. Andrew was protected while the women's stories were listened to and vetted and checked. And now he has to face the consequences. That did not happen with Al Franken, who was ousted, forced to get out before he had his due process. It certainly did not happen with Donald Trump, who there's twice as many women involved with Trump accusations as there were with Cuomo. And he has skated through as if he is blameless. We did it right in this case, and the press needs to make that clear. This is how Me Too is supposed to work. And he needs the consequences. I also have really big praise, of course, for the New York Times, but also for the Times Union, which has been covering this story, editorializing about it, and every day outrages me more. Yesterday was a story about how Andrew and the state police conspired to lie to the Times Union when they were investigating the story, not previously reported because of this lie, that he had enticed a young woman not qualified to be on his protection detail so he could feel her up all the time. That's an amazing story, and this is all detailed in the report. And then today, on the front page, is a picture of flowers being delivered to the executive mansion. I've been ranting about this for an hour. From women who support Cuomo. It's very hard for me to be a feminist today. That's ridiculous. He may not have touched you up or hurt your daughter, but that report makes clear that this is not a man who should be in public office or deserves our trust. And so I really praise the Times-Union for the coverage.
Barbara, what lessons do journalists take then from this?
Wow. I want to say that I agree with everything that
Right.
I said it so darn well. I'm
That's
almost
what you say in
speechless.
Congress. They say I like to associate myself with the remarks of the gentle lady from Colony.
Yeah. So the lessons would be to let the process continue and report on it forcefully as it happens, and try not to look too gleeful. I understand that when a politician or anybody else that you have to cover is an arrogant jerk and doesn't want to talk to you or shuts you out, or maybe conversely does a lot of good things and you kind of feel bad because somebody could be doing a lot of good and you hate to see the person fall, but you have to let the process play out and report it forcefully, which is what has been happening.
The great columnist, political columnist, late great Molly Ivins used to say, and she was at Texas, she covered Texas. No, that is wrong, Barbara. When you have all the evidence and you nail the hide of an old goat to the wall, crow about it. And that's what's happened this time.
You know, I have a story in the back of my head. I don't know how appropriate it is to tell it, but when Andrew did the gun control thing in New York State, I wrote a single column. I've written a lot of negative columns about the guy, but I wrote a single column saying, that was very good. I'm glad you did it. And the phone rang, and I was lying in bed, and the phone rang, and there was Andrew Cuomo. And he said, I'm just calling you. Somebody told me you finally wrote a good column
Did something
about me.
right. Take a note.
So I think this guy reads everything that's written about him, to be honest with you.
Well, his father, of course, famously would always say, I don't read the papers, but we then learned, of course, that he had an aide who called in at 6:30 a.m. every morning to read him the papers so that he would know what was in them.
It's not a lie.
It was not a lie.
Yeah.
That would be
Well, it was
very,
sort of a lie.
very Mario of him, that Andrew Cuomo not being quite so precise about his conscience. It is a remarkable situation where you had, on the one hand, the national press almost adulatory of Andrew Cuomo during the time that he stood in stark contrast to Donald Trump, when the Andrew Cuomo daily briefings on coronavirus made him something of almost a cult figure among liberals across the country because he was giving detailed and calm information about the coronavirus when then President Donald Trump was dismissing it. At the same time, Rosemary refers to the Times-Union reporting. At the same time, the Times-Union was unveiling some of this material that is now in this report that has been corroborated by the Attorney General's and carried much further by the Attorney General's investigation. And, of course, there was a lot of criticism of the media for this coverage of Andrew Cuomo that was less than adulatory, that didn't give him kind of all the credit that the national media, most notably television, of course, would do. So I think that that's an interesting point that Rosemary raises, or Barbara raised it, whoever raised it. It's fine. It's right that you do sometimes have this juxtaposition of really favorable coverage and really negative coverage. That's not, of course, our job to care about. It is our job to report what we find, even if that makes you unpopular, even if that puts you at risk of losing access to some of the officials who don't want to talk to you.
We're sort of like the CDC, though. One day, everything is rosy. We're sitting here talking about whether the press has been too negative about COVID. Do you remember that discussion? Mm-hmm. No, we were not too negative. And the next day it's like, oh, everything is bleak. We're all going to die of the new variant. And there is that up and down and up and down. And I think a lot of that has to do with why people don't trust us and why it's easy for them to say, I'm only going to look for the news that supports my point of view, because we do that variation. It's either all black or all white.
I want to talk a little bit, if we can, Rex, as our leader, about CNN. CNN has a couple of problems right now. They have Chris Cuomo, who is their number one attractor of watchers. And he also, let's face it, part of the reason he got there, I'm not talking about how he's performing, but how he got there, was that he was the governor's brother.
Maybe.
You think
I don't
so?
know. I think he
Oh,
got there on his own.
absolutely.
He got there on his own.
No, absolutely.
Oh, I don't think so. I think he was rising before his brother became governor. I think
Yeah.
he's in the standards that networks apply to correspondence. He does what they want him to do. He's good.
Yeah.
Well, he certainly is attracting eyeballs, and you're certainly all right about that, but you're wrong when you suggest that the name Cuomo doesn't mean anything.
I don't
It
know
does.
that it's his brother. I mean, he comes from a really long
Lineage.
and powerful family. It's Cuomo. It's the last name that helped.
Yeah.
I have no doubt about that. Just the same way that another former New York governor who had no right to be on CNN had a spot there. They like big, strong politicians, especially ones with controversy.
Well, but also where you
You're
come
talking about
from
Spitzer,
does
were you?
Yeah.
where you come from does affect how you get ahead in showbiz. And let's admit that television journalism is showbiz. So look at Anderson Cooper, the son of Gloria Vanderbilt. So
that little fortune didn't hurt him,
right,
did it?
Yeah, I don't think at all. So anyway, your point.
Well, okay, so then the question becomes, what does CNN do now? Am I my brother's keeper? Or as the herring said to the whale, am I my blubber's kipper?
We'll be here all week, folks.
Okay, that brings the show down to a whole. That's
Does this show air in the Catskills? This is really great. You have a future.
So what do they do? It seems to me that Zucker, that's his name.
Jeff Zucker, the president of CNN.
You know, you're looking at the numbers and you're saying, well, there's some people going to criticize us for playing him, but on the other hand, look at what he's doing for us.
So Chris Cuomo is the #1 show in CNN, as you said. It's at 9 p.m., right in prime time. Whoop, there is. The governor's calling. The governor's calling. So here he is on at 9 p.m. on the day that this Attorney General's report comes out, and he doesn't mention it. He doesn't deal with it at all. Is that irresponsible?
It was horrible of CNN. They should have pulled him off that show that day and had somebody else subbing in and saying, this is the huge news for every hour of our news shows today. You can't talk about it. We get that. We agree. You know, somebody else is going to have to do 2 hours instead of Lemon or whoever it might be.
Interesting, but if you're Jeff Zucker, aren't you looking and saying, "Oh, people are going to tune in to see what Chris says"?
exactly they are.
Well,
and they should have
and
addressed
then
it.
they
Yep.
right, they would say, since Chris
Yeah.
is the governor's brother, we're not going to have him on today. We're having whomever.
Well, you
Brother,
could have had him on as a commentator rather than as the anchor of the show.
And they could say, does Mom still love you better?
That's
I
funny.
gagged.
Oh, my
I
God.
gagged during that
Well,
coverage
you know, this
when he had his
whole-
brother on. It was ridiculous.
This whole brother connection has been a mess, and CNN holds as much responsibility as Chris Cuomo, who didn't do much of it in secret. They knew what he was doing.
that is, you mean earlier when he was advising his
when-
brother?
even before that, when he had COVID himself,
Oh.
and then the big brother comes on and talks about, you know, being a leader, and now my brother has it, it's in my family. That was all warm and cozy. I liked those shows,
But
even
Chris-
though I thought it was a conflict of interest.
It was a conflict, and it was kind of ridiculous. It was too much.
Yes.
But CNN obviously liked it because they let it continue to happen.
They did impose a rule, which now comes back to, which is in the context of this coverage relevant, impose a rule that Chris Cuomo can't advise his brother and shouldn't cover his brother. That is the new rule after it was revealed
Can you
that he was an
imagine, as
advisor.
you know, we've run newspapers before, and to have somebody on CNN making $5 million a year or whatever I think I read he was making, and they just discovered that, well, maybe we shouldn't do this anymore.
Right.
But they're seduced by those numbers, by the
yeah, money
viewership
talks.
numbers. And in this case, Zucker should call him in and say, Chris, you got to be looking. We're done. But he won't. I
Well,
don't think he really will unless there's
I thought
public
maybe
pressure.
maybe a suspension. I mean, did he break, besides an ethical rule, did he break a rule that's in his contract?
Not for CNN. In fact, the rule they imposed upon him is what he followed. He didn't report about his brother. But of course, the show immediately following his, Don Lemon, did lead off right
course
away.
they
As soon
should.
as Chris Cuomo left the air, there was Don Lemon reporting on the Andrew Cuomo
They didn't
report.
have their little tit-tat. Oh, brother, how you doing?
No, they did. He said, "Love you, D. Lemon." That's the last thing that Andrew Cuomo, whatever his name is, Christopher Cuomo
I missed
said
that.
before the show
So
came
what
on.
we have going here is a death watch to see whether or not.
Yeah, both brothers.
Yeah,
I'm
but-
watching both brothers.
Are you
but-
really? I don't think that's going to happen to Chris.
I agree with you.
I think that it won't be an impeachment,
Mm-hmm.
but I think that he's not long for CNN.
Well,
I
if
think he's gonna end up someplace
his numbers
else.
stay where they are, Rosemary, I think that they're not going to touch him. If his numbers went down, then I would agree with you.
Where would he go? What job would be there for Christopher Cuomo? He's not going to go to Fox News, right? Because
He won't
he's
go to
clearly identified as a liberal.
MSNBC
He can't. I
either.
mean, I don't think they would take him. And so I don't think there really is a place. It's going to be an interesting thing to watch. I think there is a good question as to whether CNN can continue to have him. And Jeff Zucker is not going to be the president of CNN for that much longer. There was a question whether he would stay a couple of months ago when his contract was apparently up. So I wonder if the next president of CNN, A, is going to be a woman, and B, is going to be somebody who will say, okay, we're done with this.
Well, Chris
That's
Cuomo's brother may no longer be governor, so they would get rid of that.
And you know, there's such a plethora of news outlets now. Like, where did the guy, what's his name, who left Fox News?
CNBC.
Yeah, Shepard Smith. He left in, CNBC. Okay, I don't even watch that, but there are other outlets. And I do think that it's time for him to leave, but this is one of Alan's woulda, shouldas. He should be leaving, but will he, with popularity where it is? I'm not sure.
Right.
You know, we
I would
all
just
have brothers and others who present problems from time to time. Not mine. I just want to make that clear. I'm in enough trouble out there already. No, but this is not an unusual question. Should the brother be responsible for what his sibling did? Or didn't do.
Or what kind of coverage comes when you have a journalist in the family, Sherrod Brown, the U.S. Senator from Ohio, whose wife...
Schultz,
thank you, is a Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist. You know, that's a difficult situation.
It is, and they covered up much better. I mean, Chris and Andrew seemed not to think there was anything wrong with it.
Well, there
and so it
wasn't.
came out.
There wasn't at the time.
There always was, because
You say so because you're a professional journalist and you have a set of admirable ethics.
Yeah.
But
And I think
man
the
on
careful
street-
viewer would think the same thing. That they only talked about things that were great. Hey, bro, how's things with the nursing home scandal? Sorry about those deaths. No, it was never about stuff like that.
Right.
So it was always irresponsible coverage just for the sake of the eyeballs that they thought people enjoyed watching it.
Speaking of
No
the nursing
kidding.
home issues, this was a topic of great, let's say, conflagration with the media that Andrew Cuomo's office insisted was overblown, which now remains a huge topic out there to be explored and exploded, I think, in
And
the same way
exploited.
that the Tish James stuff is. That is the next shoe to drop. If Andrew Cuomo somehow survives this scandal, that one will be another big one.
I think the media also now has to look at two women who have suddenly come into great positions of prominence and power. One is Letitia James, who again has done an amazing investigation. She's impressive. And the second is the lieutenant governor, who I admit I know not enough about. I know her name, and I know she's from Buffalo, and that's about it. And both of them are now immensely important in New York. And I expect to actually open the paper today and see profiles on both and have it.
Well, you will.
Shortly, I
Being a
hope.
political scientist, I can tell you a few factors. One is, in invisible ink in the Constitution, there is a line that says, if you don't come from the 5 boroughs of Manhattan, you can't be governor. And the other is, of course, that Hochul, who has been very, very true to Andrew Cuomo, let's put it that way, carrying his message again and again and again, now has the problem of having to dig her way out of all that. She's the lieutenant governor, for those of you who have no idea who she
Never
is.
heard the name.
And for all of you who have never heard the name, you're not alone.
Yeah.
Well, since this is a media program, we'll say that there was attention paid to her race for re-election last time because she had a tough race. She was up against the New York City public advocate, Jumaane Williams, and he ran a good race. She won by 7 points. In a number of places, she actually fared better than Andrew Cuomo. She actually carried better than he did in his last primary. So she actually has some strength politically, I think.
And if you read your media, of course, this is the media project, and I'm trying to justify what I'm about to say. If you read your media, she was called upon by Cuomo on this re-election to quit, to get out. And she said she would not do that. That's not speculation. We know that that's true. So, that's one more factor in how all of this is going to get played out. She can now point to the fact that she stood up to Cuomo when he told her to get out.
Interesting stuff. We will come back to this, I'm sure. But there is, of course, the other major story that we need to deal with from a media standpoint, and that is the pandemic. There's been a lot of coverage lately about the breakthrough, let's say. That's the term that is usually used for when people who actually have been vaccinated against COVID do, in fact, become infected. And there is criticism of how that has been handled by media. Anybody want to give a defense or a prosecution in that point?
I blame the CDC, which has done an atrocious job under Trump and still under Biden of getting out the message. Their only defense, and it's a strong one, but they don't wield it correctly, is, well, we're just following the science, and the science changes. Okay, I get that, but science doesn't change one day to the next. It takes like a month at least. And they just keep doing this zigzagging, and it's left people who are writing about it, much less the public, confused and distrusting. And now there's even court action against the CDC brought by conservatives about whether they're pushing their authority too much. Do they have the authority to say you can't evict people? That's happening right now as we speak. So in the breakthrough, I thought it was great that the journalists have the job. I think it speaks to great sourcing on their part that they got this information. And the Times story was really coherent and interesting, but it's the CDC's fault for the way it was presented.
I think you're letting the media off the hook.
Okay.
Too easily. I do agree with everything you're saying about the CDC and its role and how it should be presenting information. But the media have a responsibility to not rush to judgment, not rush to reporting, and presenting numbers in context. And that's one of the things that drives me crazy as a reader, as a citizen, as a journalist, as a journalism teacher, when numbers and statistics are not presented in context. And we used to say, warning, journalists doing math. And the fact that journalists are often uncomfortable with numbers and math is not an excuse, especially on topics like this. So if you're going to report, 125,000 fully vaccinated Americans have tested positive. Oh, no. And then you look when you read it more in depth, that's only 0.08% of the vaccinated people.
1,000th of 1%. Yep.
And I don't even know how to say that number. And 35 million unvaccinated Americans have tested positive for COVID. 35 million at least. So we're not reporting in context, and then the poorly reported or inadequately reported information gets repeated and repeated. It takes on a life of its own. It misrepresents reality.
So a reporter listening to this would say, let's not blame all of us. I appreciate the fact that you use media as a plural noun there. You were very careful about that. The media haven't. Because the fact is, this is a problem of editors and executive producers, isn't it? This is people saying, it was the Washington Post, actually, that had this big scoop that, oh my gosh, here's this slide from an internal presentation that talks about the danger of breakthrough. But an editor needs to resist the impulse to trumpet that when you look at the numbers.
And clearly we don't resist.
We don't resist.
As an industry.
I think there is that problem.
I think you're both wrong. There's evidence that the media has done its job well, and here it is. Since we've begun reporting on the variant, the rate of vaccination has gone back up. People are afraid by what they're reading. So isn't that proof that we are handling it correctly and we are putting it in perspective?
Rosemary, first of all, I agree with you. But it isn't only, the media that is doing this. We are finding more and more information about how dangerous this thing is. And I think that's leading people to change their minds on this. They don't want to die.
I resisted, again, that conversation we had several weeks ago about whether we were being too pessimistic. No, we're not. This is an extremely serious, ongoing epidemic, and I think the media is doing, in general, a good job in putting both the good news, which is that vaccination is incredibly safe and effective, and we got it so fast. It's a medical miracle, and we've reported it that way. It is all in superlatives, and if you don't get it, you're taking a huge risk, and we've reported that. So I'm not seeing where this imbalance or lack of context is coming from.
And in fact, one story on the TV, as we say, in which shows the dying guy behind the glass, his 6 kids on the other side of the glass, and the guy is saying, I should have taken the vaccine.
Yeah,
that's pretty powerful stuff.
Most memorable story was the nurse who talked about all of the dying patients who were saying, please give me the vaccine, I should have gotten it. And she has to tell them, I'm sorry, it's too late. That's so powerful. And right after that is when we begin seeing an uptick in vaccinations.
I have to ask your advice as people in the media. I was talking to a nurse who is not getting the vaccination.
Unvaccinated.
Well,
unvaccinated.
She's going to lose her job.
And is going to lose her job.
Good.
Recognizes that she's going to lose her job. And says, if you could show me somebody who's, and I had just read these other stories about the people in the medical profession and others saying, oh my gosh, I wished I had gotten the vaccine. And then, the kicker at the story was the person has passed away. So those stories, the facts and the stories are out there. The evidence, the scientific evidence and the anecdotal evidence are out there.
I
and
agree.
Yet you have a segment of people, even in healthcare, who are not listening.
Yeah. But the way it's being reported is so important. And you tell a story about the guy behind the glass and the 6 children. I mean, it makes a big difference when that happens. And we know that people are ignoring facts.
Well, you're both right. It does make an impact. We're seeing that with more people getting, but some people, as Barbara notes, are not seeing it. Just give me one person. I've heard the same thing.
Sure.
Yeah, this is actually at a time when it actually is advantageous for us to have a little bit more subjective coverage rather than the just he said, she said stuff that we've decried in this program before, the both sidism, because coverage that actually lets journalists put their own views into it gives you an opportunity to single out people like that and say, this is dumb. This is inappropriate. That would be a great story. Your nurse friend ought to be the topic of a column. Somebody could say this is a hazard and this person deserves to lose
But
her
you know,
job.
in the world of the she said, he said, if I was that person, I would be saying, I could give you 300 stories about people who haven't been vaccinated and are perfectly safe and have been healthy.
Yeah, never got it. Yeah.
Yeah, but use that number you just did. 125,000 breakthrough cases, 0.08%. Use that number.
I'll send that along.
Yeah, let us know how that goes.
I had that conversation in the line at the pharmacy. 2 people behind me in the line were saying, well, this feels like Russia, where they're going to make you get a shot. And so I turned around and just, I'm not a newspaper editor anymore. I'm retired. And I said, that point of view is going to kill people, It really
And they said, thank you for pointing that out, dear sir.
And he didn't punch you.
No, actually, it turned out the guy who was complaining about this being like Russia had, in fact, had the vaccination. He had been a COVID patient. He had a mild case of it, but the woman in front of him had not yet had the vaccination, and she was kind of left dumbfounded. Dumb being the relevant word there, I think, for those who don't get the vaccine.
Well, we have to keep telling the stories.
Telling the
Keep
stories.
telling stories, keep the scientific evidence out there and the anecdotes.
But nuance is hard. Nuance is hard in journalism, both in teasing a story on broadcast or in writing a headline in print and digitally, where headlines also have a place. It is hard to get the statistics clarified when what you're reporting is, oh my God, there are breakthrough cases, which is relevant. But to say there are breakthrough cases, but it's not the vast majority of the cases, that's a hard thing.
Coming back to what Rosemary was saying, that's an example where the CDC could be helping the media help the public.
And I'm still concerned about outright misinformation. It has nothing to do with nuance. It has to do with people who are saying, I'm not going to get the shot because it messes with my DNA. I'm not going to wear a mask because it increases the risk of tuberculosis. And like you, Rex, I just want to jump all over this. Like, fine, die. And you cannot say that. I understand this. I'm not saying that. So how do you get to them?
Both ways. Good for you. With that, we have to let it go. This show ought to be in an hour.
No.
Rosemary Armao, Barbara Lombardo, Alan Chartock, and I'm Rex Smith.
Ting-a-ling-a-ling, circulation, ting-a-ling-a-ling, advertising, get those readers, get that payoff. What a headache, what a mess. Oh, publishers are such interesting people. Let's give 3 cheers for freedom of the press.